Hello cardboard lovers, it's Cardboard Badger here. I hope you're doing well, and today we have a brand new deck tech for you. We are going Simic Counters standard deck tech with cards from Ikoria, LAIR of Behemoths. Obviously this is not going to be standard legal until Ikoria drops on the 15th of May, but super excited to show you just exactly what we can do with some of the fantastic new cards. And that will also give you a little bit of time if you are excited about this deck and you do want to build it yourself and you don't have all the cards. It does give you a little bit of time to obviously scoop them up and have them all ready for when we return back to our good old LGSs and F&M. So let's get straight into it. We have 24 creatures in total, starting off with 2 copies of Terramander. For 1 blue mana we have a Salamander Drake, 1/1 flyer, and for 7 and a blue we have Adapt 4, where we will be able to put 4+1/+1 counters on the Terramander, and the mana cast will be 1 cheaper for each instant and sorcery spell in our graveyard. It doesn't matter if we don't have any instants or sorceries in our graveyard, because there are creatures in this deck that will be able to reduce that adapt cost. And then we will have a 5/5 flyer. Up next we have 4 copies of Growth Chamber Guardian. For 2 mana, 1 and a green, we have an Elf Crab Warrior 2/2, and for 2 and a green we have Adapt 2. If this creature has no +1/+1 counters on it, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And whenever 1 or more +1 counters are put on the Growth Chamber Guardian, you may search your library for a card named Growth Chamber Guardian. Reveal it, put it into your hand and shuffle your library. So every time, or the first time, we put a +1/+1 counter on the Growth Chamber Guardian, and it can be from other things other than its adapt, we will be able to search our library, go and get another Elf Crab Warrior, and then play that hopefully on our next turn. Up next we have 3 copies of Biomancer's Familiar. For 2 mana, a green and a blue, we have a 2/2 mutant with activated abilities of creatures you control, cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the amount of mana and ability cost to activate to less than 1 mana. But this is pretty good because the previous card, Growth Chamber Guardian, it is now going to cost, if we have our Biomancer out, 1 green mana to activate its adapt and go and get another one. Up next we have 2 copies of Wildborn Preserver. For 2 mana, 1 and a green, we have an Elf Archer 2/2 with flash and with reach as well. And whenever a non-human creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay X. When you do, put X +1/+1 counters on Wildborn Preserver. So, apart from a couple of cards, the entire deck is non-human. So, every time we play a creature, if we have spare mana, and we should have plenty, we will be able to dump all that extra mana as an X cost and put loads of counters on the Wildborn Preserver, which is pretty good because it has reach. So, excellent card. Up next we have 2 copies of Incubation Druid. For 2 mana, 1 and a green, we have an Elf Druid 0/2, and you can tap it and add 1 mana of any type that a land you control will produce. And if Incubation Druid has a +1/+1 counter on it, you can add 3 mana of that type instead. This is an amazing card. There are ways that we can put a +1/+1 counter on this rather than pay the adapt, which is 5 mana, 3 green, and then we have adapt 3, and we will be able to put 3 +1/+1 counters on this druid instead. So for most of the time we are just attempting to get 1 counter onto this elf druid so we can cheaply tap for 3 mana. Next we have 2 copies of Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. For 2 mana, green and a blue, we have a legendary creature, human druid 2/2 with, whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced. So if this is out, we are able to use our Incubation Druid, and that will be able to tap for 2. Or if it happens to have a +1/+1 counter on it, it is going to be tapping for 4 mana. And there are plenty of other cards in the deck that will enable a lot of the other creatures to tap for the mana. Also, this is a super exciting card. Plus, for 7 mana, 5 green and a blue, we can look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Kinnan is the only human in the entire deck, so we have 22 creatures that we have a chance to find thanks to Kinnan and put onto the battlefield. Excellent, excellent card indeed. 2 copies. Next, we have Evolution Sage for 3 mana. 2 and a green. We have an Elf Druid 3/2, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. So we can choose any number of permanents and or players and give them each a counter of each kind already there. So the whole deck is about counters. Everything that happens to have a counter will now have an additional one every time a land enters the battlefield. That is a good thing. Next, we have a super favourite of mine. We have 3 copies of Galloping Lizrog for 5 mana. 3 green and a blue. We have a Frog Lizard, a 3/3 Trampler, and when Galloping Lizrog enters the battlefield, you may remove any number of +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control. If you do, put twice that many +1/+1 counters on Galloping Lizrog. So, if we were to say that we'd proliferated a couple of times thanks to our Evolution Sage, and we were able to move 5 counters from some of our other creatures in total, we would then put this onto the Galloping Lizrog. It would double. We would then have a 13/13 Trampler. Up next, we have 2 copies of Rolesk Apex Hybrid for 5 mana. 2 green, green, blue. We have a legendary creature, Human Mutant, 4/5 Flying Trampler. And when Rolesk Apex Hybrid enters the battlefield, put 2 +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control. So you have the option of putting it on your Incubation Druid. If you happen to have one out with no counters, then that will allow the Druid to tap for 3 mana. Really good because you can direct it where you want. And when Rolesk dies, proliferate. We will put +1 counters on everything on our side of the board that has counters on, and then proliferate again. It is amazing. Absolutely amazing card. Our next card, we have 1 copy of Hydroid Krasis. 4x green and a blue. We have a Jellyfish Hydra Beast, and when you cast this spell, you gain half X life and draw half X cards rounded down each time. It is a flying trampler, and Hydroid Krasis enters the battlefield with X +1 counters on it. So we spend 8 mana on this. We get a 6/6 flying trampler, and obviously we will then gain 3 life and we will gain 3 cards. We can hopefully get this out for a lot more than a 6/6. This is excellent because it allows you to refill your hand and gain some life, and you also have the opportunity of having a reasonably big flyer with trample as well. Just the one, but an amazing card. And our final creature, just the 1 copy, we have Voracious Hydra. X green green, we have a Hydra, 0/1 Trampler, and Voracious Hydra enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When Voracious Hydra enters the battlefield, you can double the number of +1 counters on the Hydra, or have the Hydra fight a target creature you don't control. When we have lots of mana available, we will just double them and dump as many counters onto this as humanly possible, because that helps some of the cards that we haven't seen yet. And don't forget, if on our next turn or 2 we have a Galloping Lizrog out, we can just move all the Hydra's tokens onto Lizrog. That also has trample, and the Lizrog will double those tokens. We can get a huge number of tokens in a couple of turns. Up next, our non-creature spells. We are starting off with an amazing card from Ikoria. We have 2 copies of the Ozolith, a 1 mana legendary artifact with whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, so it doesn't say die, it could be flickered. If it had counters on it, not just +1/+1s, it could be menace counters, lifelink counters, it could be any of them. You can put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith had counters on it, you may move all the counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. It says you may, so if you don't want to on combat and you want to keep them for a little bit longer, that's fine. But every single creature that we have technically has the opportunity to have counters on it, and every time they die or get flickered, they will go onto the Ozlith, and we can reuse them and place them onto another creature at a later date, which is very, very important with our alternative win condition, which you will be seeing very, very shortly. This card I am so excited about. It's absolutely amazing. Up next, we have one copy of Incubation Incongruity. For most of the time, we are going to be using the incubation side. For 1 mana, hybrid, green or blue, we have a sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you may reveal a creature card from among them, and then put it into your hand. Put the rest onto the bottom of your library in a random order. Up next, we have the other half of the Ozlith Insanity. We have 2 copies of Simic Ascendancy, the alternative win condition, and this is amazing. For 2 mana, a green and a blue, we have an enchantment with whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if Simic Ascendancy has 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. It is absolutely amazing. Plus, for 3 mana, 1 green and a blue, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So if we happen to put 7 mana in our Voracious Hydra, we've got a 5/5. We then have it double. It's got 10 counters on it. We are going to have 10 counters put on the Simic Ascendancy. Unfortunately, it gets killed. All those counters will then go on the Ozlith, and then on our next turn, we can just put those 10 counters onto something else. Our Terramander have an 11/11 flyer. That will again trigger another 10 counters because we have put counters onto a creature we control. We will then have 20 counters, and on our upkeep, we will win the game. We also have 2 copies of Growth Spiral. For 2 mana, green and a blue, we have an instant with draw a card, and you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So a little bit of card draw, the ability to put an additional land down and ramp up. 2 copies of. Next, we have 3 copies of Essence Capture. For 2 mana, blue, we have an instant with counter target creature spell and put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature you control. So we'll counter our opponent, and then we can put that counter onto our Incubation Druid, enabling us to tap the Druid for 3 mana, or possibly put it on our Growth Chamber Guardian. That will trigger Adapt, and we can go into our library and get our second Growth Chamber Guardian. Excellent value indeed. We also have 2 copies of Negate to counter target non-creature spell. Up next, we have a Planeswalker. We have 1 copy of Jiang Yangu Wildcrafter. For 3 mana, 2 and a green, we have Yangu. 3 loyalty Planeswalker, and the static ability, each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has tap and add 1 mana of any colour. So most of our creatures are going to have +1 counters on. We can also minus Yangu and put a +1 counter on a target creature, and then they can tap the mana. Alongside Kinnan, we will be able to tap each creature for 2 mana of any colour. We are also running 1 copy of Wilderness Reclamation. For 4 mana, 3 and a green, we have an enchantment with at the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. And we're also running 1 copy of Chemist's Insight. For 4 mana, 3 and a blue, we have an instant, draw 2 cards, and jumpstart, which is something that we will normally do, so at least we have a little bit more card draw. And our final card, before we get to the lands, we have 1 copy of the Great Henge. For 9 mana, 7 green, we have a legendary artifact. This spell will cost X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control, which should be reasonably high because of all the +1 counters. We can tap it, add 2 mana, and gain 2 life. And whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on it and draw a card. Additional counters, additional card draw, and the ability to gain a little bit of life if needed. This is absolutely fantastic. And finally, we get to the land base. We have a total of 24 lands. We have 1 copy of Breeding Pool. We also have 1 copy of Guildmage's Forum. 1 copy of Khan's Bastion, giving us the ability to proliferate every turn. We also have 1 copy of Castle Garenbrig. There's some additional ramp. And we have 11 forests and also 9 islands. And that is it. So there we have it. That is the end of the Simic Counters Ikoria Lair of Behemoths deck tech. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let us know in the comments below what you would change and why. And obviously, if you do end up building this deck or something similar, please let me know how you get on, how many counters you can get in one turn. I would love to hear your thoughts. Other than that, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching, and we will see you again soon here on Cardboard Badger.